While Golden Demon might not be the biggest miniature competition or the most prestigious among painters, it sure is the best known and probably the most aspirational and nostalgic of them all. Every kid new to Warhammer probably uttered the words, "I'm going to win a Golden Demon someday." And year after year, thousands of painters spend an unreasonable amount of time painting the prettiest Warhammer minis they can in an effort to take home one of these shiny statues. Or even the most coveted trophy of them all, the Slayer's Sword. A Golden Demon is the place where dreams come true or hundreds of hours of effort quietly vanish into the void. And today, once again, we dive into the results of the latest iteration, Golden Demon Adepticon 2026. And while it's maybe not the Golden Demon winners review content you needed, it's the one you're getting. So let's look at all the winning entries, the ridiculous level of skill, newest trends, and let's try to figure out what it takes to stand out among the best. The event photos are always a point of discussion, and people always want me to comment on the quality. And I'd say, on average, they are rather good this time. Some seem to be a little underexposed or maybe underlit. But if you ever took pictures of miniatures, especially if you are trying to document dramatically different sizes of projects, and it also depends on the light setup and background used. We will start with the Warhammer 40k single category, and in third place we have one of my favorites of the competition already. Alexei Carhalio created this Praetor ready to embark on his jet bike, resting his foot on the vehicle, and I think that bike is mounted to the base only through being attached to his foot, which makes it look like it's actually floating. There's lots of great elements here. Of course, the base supports the story you want to tell. There's lots of intricate detail, like the reflection patterns on the lens. Very characterful face, texturing on the clothes, and there's also some leather texture showing on the seat here. I always like to wait a couple of days to record this video, because the painters put some more pictures out and share their thoughts, which provides a better insight into their process and struggles, and I think that makes the wait worth it. So here Alexi shows us a few extra angles, which shows us additional reflections, like the plume reflecting in the gold, or this cool diagnostics monitor down here, which is an amazing detail that we don't see in the one angle shot that Games Workshop provided. Just a reminder that we simply can't grasp the whole picture of the competition from just the photos Games Workshop is posting. It looks like all of the metal has a certain burnished metal effect, and I like the different qualities of metal that are rendered here, like that more brass looking material the bike and most of the armor are made of, and then the super shiny gold standing out from it even more. The gold has a warmer tone with lots of orange browns, and there's a lot of cool bounce line effects, and there's a nice marble effect on the base. Again, I have to stress that just going off of pictures can never tell the full story. But the spirit of these videos is always to help painters that aspire to go and compete in Golden Demons, to create more competitive entries and to learn something. So if I'm pointing out details that I notice, it is not to put anyone down. It's just to help viewers improve and understand why the result of the competition played out like they did. One thing I wasn't entirely sure about is the pattern down here. I assume it's a halo effect, and the light of the candles reflecting maybe, or it's just a pattern that's created by the burnished metal. But it's also a good occasion to talk about texture. Anything you add to a Golden Demon piece needs to elevate it. Like here, the conversion added some epic storytelling. Stuff like the leather texture gave it some world building, and the reflection patterns on the lens just shows that extra painting skill. At the same time, I feel like this area down here is super difficult to render perfectly, or at least it adds hours of work, and sometimes you just run out of hours. So again, while this was my personal favorite of the category, maybe because there's some kind of texture on every element here, it was tough to execute everything to the same level. Very important thing to keep in mind for Golden Demon. And some of these observations are echoed in Alexei's thoughts he shared after the competition, mainly saying even though he was working on this piece for about 16 weeks, he wished there was a little more time to refine everything. And I think it's also worth mentioning that he says this was a bit of a stressful experience, something I think is often overlooked. Working on one single piece for weeks, trying to push your abilities takes effort and dedication, and often is exhausting. And at the end of the day, if you can't execute everything to the level you want, you might lose against an out-of-the-box model that focuses on fewer aspects, but manages to refine those a lot more. Alexi kindly sent me a few pictures of the conversion. Really cool way to repose the model while keeping most of the original bits, and you can also see the base. Again, using just enough original bits to keep the Warhammer flavor, and then the milliput elements with all the neatly carved lines and patterns. The second place goes to Bob Cahoon's Vuegan. A classic interpretation of the character with the orange and red tones. I find it interesting what painters come up with to define the rather empty space on the helmet extensions. Here we have a cool dark framing and some texture on the inside. The axe has a cool little light effect. And I like the relatively simple base. Green tones on gray stone are always tight balanced to get right. And I also like how it is spiced up a little by the Necron torso that also received a lot of care. The golden 40k single goes to Neil Hollis' Space Wolf Terminator. That's based on Logan Grimnar's model, I believe. I think what stands out here is the rather clean execution of the armor, all the reflection lines here on the individual elements, subtle glow on the axe, and the sheath of the dagger. The face is also very characterful and smooth at the same time. I like the slightly purple and blue color shifts in there, but what makes this piece really stand out is the show base that is completely made from resin, and then there's a little piece of black showing up here. That's meant to be the rock that he's standing on. This is some very cool craftsmanship, especially with the swordfish in there and getting the resin to be so clear. And I also like the execution of the snow a lot. It really makes it look credible and almost real. Everything is rather muted, lots of cool colors, desaturated reds, all of that created a cool, cold mood that fits the mini and setting really well, obviously. And Neil shared a few behind-the-scenes pictures, and I'm not going to pretend I know what's going on. Maybe one of you is now smarter and can explain what happened in the comments. We have a little tradition when doing these reviews, and that is picking out a few extra entries that I spotted during or after the event, but that caught my eye in one way or another. And in the 40k single category, there was Ben Cantor with his Eldar Farseer. Very atmospheric piece. I really like the directional light and the interplay of bright chromatic colors and dark desaturated colors it creates. Another OSL heavy piece by Simon Sikora, a really cool color palette, very neon-esque turquoise and purple reflections on black armor on this dark Eldar Archon, a very precise execution, amazing blending and wide contrast range, very moody piece too. I really like it. Definitely one of my favorites in this category. I have a bit of a hunch, and this is just me wearing the thickest tinfoil hat I can find, but I think OSL heavy miniatures, at least in the single mini categories, will have a hard time placing top 3. Maybe because this is so far removed from the box art style Games Workshop has, or maybe it's because they think people can't quite wrap their head around how to replicate that. While they might think, okay, I somewhat could replicate this if I tried hard enough with differently rendered minis. But I can't think of even one single mini category winner in the past few years that had major OSL. But before we talk about the next category, let me first tell you about some exciting news from Into the AM. They reworked the discount structure, which means you can get even more of these epic t-shirts they're so well known for even cheaper. Awesome shirts like this one, or this one, this one, or this one, or this one, or this one, but they are also the clothing company with a basic line that feels like premium apparel instead. I own tons of it: polo shirts, long sleeves, button-down shirts, pullovers, active tees, hoodies, or jackets. Just because the fit is so great and it works in all kinds of situations. Into the AM basic tees are the literal foundation for great looking styles that are also comfortable. And the good news is that right now you can get these basic tees at a massive discount if you grab a 3, 6 or 9 pack. And if you're still not convinced, listen to this. Into the AM has sold over 5 million units of basic tees to over 1 million happy customers, and they received over 48,000 positive reviews on their Amazon and web store combined. Make sure to use my link in the description to grab additional discounts on any 3, 6 or 9 pack, like on these graphic tees. The discounts are applied automatically if you are using my link, so no more fiddling around with codes, just convenient shopping and saving money while elevating your style to the next level. I love Into the AM clothes. I'm rarely wearing anything else these days, and you can feel comfortable while looking dashing too. So go visit their web store using my link in the description and grab your discounts. And now let's continue with the next Golden Demon category. Warhammer 40k unit or kill team starts with Aaron Clark taking 3rd place with his Honor Guard unit led by Cato Sicarius, and it's a gigantic endeavor to try and execute a style like this on 5 minis. And then there's 2 banners on top, and even though I think he painted the original sculpted banners, that's still a lot of real estate to cover. All of them also have cloaks too, and you have to paint the front and the back side, because this isn't Instagram. I like the crispness of the white trims, for example, the contrast on the gold. Just look at the helmet here, going from really dark to really bright while still keeping the gold color quality. And contrast on the feathers on the helmet looks very nice. And then of course you have to do a lot of blue armor. And here I think there's stronger parts and some parts that are a little weaker maybe. And I'm going to wager that this was mainly due to time restraints. He opted for a relatively shiny armor, but most elements seem to have one major highlight. There's no secondary highlights here on the shin guards or on the shoulders, you can see what I mean. And there's also no bounce lights like on the round shapes like on the knees here. I think rendering these is always a good way to add a little bit of that extra premium look. On Aaron's Instagram, we can also see a back shot, and I feel like while the contrast looks great on the red parts, it looked kind of uniform. Like maybe if you had some extra time, you want to park some freehands there. But yeah, entries like this are always impressive in the cabinet, but so much work. So I admire the dedication. 2nd place goes to Lucas Vigering for this tight group of Khorne Berserkers. Very subdued and muted color scheme. Most colors start very dark, and then there's only very confined highlights of bright color. Look at the reds or the blackish parts of the backpacks, for example. The only parts where you can find some brighter specks are the highlights in the metal trims. Even the plasma that usually is rendered rather bright to simulate glowing hot is rather dark. So this becomes a very moody piece. I think my favorite part in this is the gold on the shoulders. It's also muted, but it has some very appealing midtones and great contrast, going from dark all the way up to white. Gold goes to TD McDonald, and I think it's a funny coincidence that we went from 5 to 4 to 3 minis, and I guess it could be a consideration to work around these time restraints. And you have to weigh the pros and cons of using more minis versus the minimum of 3. More minis could mean a more impressive entry, but it also means additional work, while fewer minis might make for a tighter composition. Like here in this case. Just something to keep in mind. So here we have 3 minis from the Hell's Last box, all of them featuring more pastel colors, from the reds that are closer to a pink and purple and blues on the banner to the green of the armor. It's a bit of a fresh take, and you still get the very dark base, and generally the lower area of the minis is dark. And most areas received some texture, stippling on the large banner surfaces or the sash, and more of a line pattern here on the cloak. My favorite part of this is probably the copper-colored shoulders on the priest. And one thing to mention is that there was quite a few categories, especially the unit categories, that had only 3 finalists. And a lot of entries that only got finalists in Germany last year placed or even won their categories at Golden Demon Adepticon. Usually this is an indicator for lower participation numbers, but this is just an outside observation. If you were at the event, feel free to let me know in the comments if you had a different impression. Warhammer 40k large of vehicle saw 2 large models and 1 vehicle win, and it kind of makes me wish they would bring back the vehicle category, because I think it's two different skill sets that are compared against each other and smashed together in this category. I think I would never enter a vehicle in this category simply because it's a lot harder to create something impressive with a mechanical miniature than something like, for example, a Nightbringer, like this one by Katarzyna Gorska that took 3rd place. Very unique style has become a regular winner at Golden Demons. You can see it down here, all the typical rounded line patterns, and I feel like maybe for this model it isn't the greatest fit, especially down here where we have a lot of angular patterns. It feels a little out of place maybe, while on the upper parts where we have more organic shapes, again, it integrates a lot better, in my opinion. I like the purple cape and the feeling of organic cold steel, and also the red that is a great deviation from the usual greens we get on Necrons. Also the orange on the scarabs looks really cool. I also like the blackish dark base, looking like anything he touches just turns black and dies. Generally, this style isn't necessarily focused on smoothness and blends, but more on contrast, intense colors, and their interaction. Something that used to not do very well at Golden Demons a few years ago, but nowadays with the slight shift of philosophy in judging, repeatedly managed to pick up a trophy. 2nd place goes to John Majota, also brings another recognizable style that has done very well in the past. He picks up a trophy with a sentinel in a heavily weathered style, darkened edges, rust, and some specks of metal shining through, and then the typical scratch patterns. I especially like the weathering patterns of the white stripe in the front, where it looks like paint is cracking off, and all the subtle rust streaks. This is also a re-entry from Adepticon 2025, where it picked up a commend. And another Golden Demon regular, Nicholas Rubens Mortensen, with his very distinct style, takes gold with this orc. The base model has established a place in the top 3 of a lot of Golden Demons through the years now. Very popular model amongst painters because it's just so characterful and has a lot of customization potential. The rider is swapped with a boys leader body, and there have been other modifications to the Squigosaur, like that big exhaust is gone and replaced with some dynamite. When it comes to painting, no surface is just a simple gradient. Everything has some texture and a bit of a color shift. For example, the skin of the mount goes from a saturated red to these almost gray looking parts where the skin attaches. And then on top, the black spots and the slightly yellowing on the belly where the sand color is reflecting. Or maybe it's just dust collecting. Either way, it's an additional element that just elevates the piece. And every metal surface is rendered so credible. Same for the leather. All these little cracks, super credible. And then you even have the typical blue graying that leather often has, if you look at a lot of references. Another thing that stood out to me was the teeth. Lots of painted texture. They look so three-dimensional. And of course, there is just lots and lots of detail and storytelling on the base. Poor ultramarine. He posted a few pictures of the conversion, and I like that a lot of it is simple swaps, like the upper body, or adds like the orc emblem on the back, and then subtle sculpted details like the added dynamite and the small banners. Warhammer Age of Sigmar single is always a very hard fought for category, very prestigious, and it offers just a lot of different fantastic miniatures to choose from in the range, as well as a ton of customization options, as we are going to see. The 3rd place again goes to Katarzyna Gorska and her Alrach the Drowner. Very ghostly, ethereal scene with a lot of warm colors at the front, transitioning into cold blue tones in the back, gives this an extra sense of direction, kind of like he's moving towards the light, that I like a lot. Again, this is a very expressive, fantastic style. Every feature has some kind of color shift. Look at the lantern, for example. Something we expect to be warm and bright, and then as the smoke extends back, it turns purple and blue. And that style contrasts nicely against the other 2 entries with a more grounded style, I'd say. For example, 2nd place going to Raphael Bouillon. He has won some trophies in the past. There's really a lots of regulars again at this Golden Demon. And this time he brings this Wood Elf Archer, a very dynamic figure, well placed in an extensive scene. The figure itself is rendered perfectly, all of these smooth blends and very well balanced, almost monochromatic color scheme, but a lot of warmth in it. I like the light reflecting on the scales, which is of great significance, as we're going to see. The base fits very well into that scheme too, with the brighter area around the mini framing it perfectly, and then fading towards a darker rendering on the outside and the lower part. The grass and moss tufts and the rest of the vegetation look very natural. It almost looks real. And of course all the small critters that he sculpted himself. Raphael uploaded his own pictures by now, so we also get to enjoy the backside of this piece, and you see that the mood changes completely, going from a lively, warm scene to a dark palette and cold colors. Skeletons and gnarly roots representing death and darkness trying to choke life. Really great storytelling, which is always a good extra layer to add on a Golden Demon entry. And one thing I'd like to add though, and this is not a critique because it's perfectly within the rules, just my personal opinion. When I first saw this piece I thought, isn't that base a little excessive for such a small figure? I mean, again, the larger space opened the door for the extensive storytelling and gives us a really awesome piece, but I guess personally, I'm having a bit of a hard time with these single miniature categories turning more and more into another diorama category. Like the base is about 4 to 5 times the size of the mini, and we can find 5 or 6 scratch built critters on it too. I just think there's beauty in trying to work with confined spaces, but again, that's just me. Of course, this is still a gorgeous piece. Let me know what you think about this trend in the comments. And finally, Thibaut Ram securing another category win with his favorite faction, Siege. A kind of the opposite angle than the entry before. All the eggs are in the miniature basket, so to say, and the base is rather minimalistic. Always great to see these different philosophies pitched against each other at the Golden Demons. A wonderful subtle conversions on the beast. I love the extra set of eyes. Very cool kit bash and conversion of the Stormcast Rider into a champion of Siege. And then of course the very expressive rendering on the non-metallic metal parts that has become sort of the norm with Golden Demons over the years. Also how the gold looks super polished and shifts from warmer tones into the screen shade back here. I like the shiny glaive blade a lot, a very harmonic scheme, even though there is almost every color the wheel has to offer in there. Turquoise, blue, purple, orange, yellow, you kinda get the idea. Here's a few shots of the conversion. Again, I like that there is a lot of bits coupled together from a lot of sources with just the right amount of putty. And I'm always a sucker for flowing cloaks like this. One mini that didn't place, but I really enjoyed was Semlin's Skaven bike. At least I'm assuming this was in the Age of Sigmar category. I really love the base with his burrowing pal. The stones look great and the confined space really gives a little bit of claustrophobia. A really cool concept. Another piece that stood out to me for its simplicity was this Undead Warrior by Lore Minis. Really simple but well executed, cool atmosphere, a little texture, just a really well-rounded solid piece. Next up we have Age of Sigmar unit or Underworld's warbands with bronze going to Rafael Garcia Marin. Very cool scene, almost entirely painted with 2 complementary colors, magenta and turquoise, which is very effective. The base fits flesh eaters very well, really makes this look like a horde storming out of a cave where leftover victims are strewn across, and I like how the placement of figures and their poses support that picture in my head. A really cool entry that shows how effective working with a limited palette can be. Second place goes to Brandon Ryan and these chameleon skinks. I like that these all have a slightly different skin tone and also that there's a bit of a mix between traditional heavy metal style, very evident on small features like the toes and the sharp distinction between muscle groups, but also more contrasting volumetric rendering, like on the head crests. Also there's a lot of texturing going on, like stippling to make the skin more interesting. Lucas Viggering wins gold with these Darkwater Nurgle minis. These are really awesome sculpts and he gave them a very cool interpretation. A bit different from your typical Nurgle color schemes, and I think this works very well with these minis. I heard a few voices online that they are a little flat, but personally I disagree. The colors are rather muted again, just like with his Corn Squad and 40k, but there's a lot of stuff going on here. I like the different shades on the metals. For example, on this right arm there's brass plates, gray ones, and then the braces are another shade altogether. And then the round details here are all different shades of metal too. So lots of different materials rendered, and I also like how with all the weathering you still understand that this is metal, and there even is some more reflective parts still showing through, like on this shoulder for example. I really enjoy the overall darker mood that these figures bring, and the paint job supports that notion too. Another thing that stands out to me is the skin of the arm. All the different shades and the purple blue shadows with the added bounce sides makes this look very painterly, reminding me a little of Age 80s fantasy illustration. I also like the bright swirly thing here and how it becomes a bit of a focal point versus the muted colors. And he also put a few extra pictures of the base building process online that I find very interesting. In the Warhammer Age of Sigmar or War Machine category, vulture wings are in high demand these days. Third place going to this Cruel Boys Lord by Carlos Garcia. One thing I like about this entry is the way he painted this tree on the base. Really love the detail on the bark and the color shades, looking very realistic, and then of course the small resin water detail. Lots of different textures on this mini, making it a very challenging canvas. I especially like the feather crest around the head with the bright feathers being framed by a darker border. And even though the color scheme is very muted, there's a few deliberate specks of color placed, especially the vulture head, but there's also a lot of focus on the cruel boy face. It's almost looking like there's some light hitting the face while he peeks out from under the hood. Silver goes to this Festus by Marco Frisoni, not just Mecha here on YouTube. And of course the first thing that stands out is the spectacular resin base. Fantastic craftsmanship, getting that base with different levels done and fitting it to the miniature is just unreal. Also, the base looks like a typical Nurgle tongue slobbering out of a mouth and drool dripping from it. Plus, look at all the detailing on it with the spots. And that pattern also repeats on the giant slug. Generally, the slug has a lot of color shades, very smooth results, and from what Marco uploads to his YouTube channel, I'm assuming he used a lot of oil paints here, which would explain the smoothness and all the rich colors. And all of that repeats on Festus too. And look at any given surface and count the number of shades you can spot: purple, red, or orange, desaturated yellow in the ropes, for example, and lots of different sick shades on the skin, and then different shades of the tentacle craft too. Just so much fun variation in all of these elements. Some tasteful OSL there too that supports the scene and isn't too obnoxious. And all the flasks are rendered very nicely. Just such a well-rounded entry with a base you don't see every day. This was another favorite of mine. And I'd maybe have seen it in the first place, but Lucas Holmström had something against that and swooped in, grabbing first place with a second winged demon in a row. My guess was when you find something that works in Golden Demon, it's good to repeat it. But honestly, it's probably a smart idea and great strategy, because this gives you the chance to reapply everything you learned and maybe got feedback on the last time and enter something like an improved version. This time also everything was bigger, both the figure and the base. And he also went for bright feathers this time on the wings, painstakingly painting thousands of brush strokes, rendering the texture. Again, I like these darker parts of the feathers. That's a good way to make the structure and the sculpt readable. And then how the outline on the big feathers first fades into a darker color and on the very edges goes into a bright highlight again. And skin is another specialty of his by now, so while this overall reads as very bright, there's lots of different shades depending where you look on the mini. More of a purple on the feet, brighter reddish tones on the knees, and around the scale feature on the chest. All the muscle groups are defined in a very subtle way, and yet they look very natural, and we get the idea that this is a demon with a massive pump. The face looks really lively, looking almost alive in a sense. Deep shadows placed around the nose and mouth box, a bright light rendered on the forehead, lots of different shades in the skin, around the eyes, inside of the ears, cheeks, around the horns, etc, etc. So much attention to detail. And the light placement on the horns, giving them almost an obsidian or metallic quality. On the zoom in, you can also see that there's hints of purple between some feathers, something I didn't realize at first. They just released the video on the Squidmart channel, and it turns out Lucas spent 400 hours on this entry, and I think it really shows. As much as I'm thinking about entering Golden Demon again, I wouldn't even know where I could find 400 hours of spare time to spend on an entry. The Horus Heresy category starts with a cool Magnister red, and the base that gives reality-bending vibes. A dark with just hints of purple shining from within. And as we go up, all the ambient light is reflecting in the gold armor, giving it a very polished feeling. I like these tablets dangling from his midsection, the blue color and how light reflects on them. Lots of light reflecting in the chest piece too. We have some turquoise light playing on it there, and of course the purple from whatever sorcery he is conjuring up with his right hand. Forgeworld's hair is usually very defined, very thin strands, and the recesses love to suck up paint with their capillary forces, So it's always a little difficult rendering this, but this is a good effort, I'd say. And then in the back, we can see the attention to detail, every single gemstone defined, and there's also some ambient light reflecting in the scarab gem on the chest piece here. Very colorful entry. I like it a lot. Adam Hitchens scores a silver demon with this Night Lord in Mark II power armor. I think the helmet might be scratch built or maybe kit bashed with an element from the Night Lord's kill team. Very straightforward, clean color scheme. Reminds me of some old demon entries. Very old school rendering and color choices. Also the way the non-metallic gold is rendered with the white outline all around it is very reminiscent of the Golden Demon style prevalent during the early 2000s. A really cool throwback in my opinion. A gold goes to this Forgework Fulgrim by Mohamed Ahmedi. I always like this sculpt a little better than the new Fulgrim Transfigured, mainly for that awesome demon face on the body that is just rendered in a very cool way here, almost like it's staring into my soul. The center portion receiving more light and then fading into purple shadows towards the edges. The bright eyes staring angrily. I just love it. The color scheme is very well done, great color choices, nothing is screaming at you, which again allows to do all the focus with values alone. Like that face drawing more attention because it's painted brighter and I guess using a bit more magenta than the rest of the purple armor. Reflections on the gold are a little more subtle than on some other golds we've seen so far, but it has all the richness it needs, ranging from brownish red tones to bright yellows, and then green gems with a slight shift into blue on the highlights work really well against that backdrop. Everything has the right contrast, like the scales work so well with the upper parts catching more light, giving the piece some extra three-dimensionality and weight. And last but not least, everything looks so smooth. I think this is probably the smoothest blending we've seen so far in the competition. I'm really a fan. Warhammer The Old World, such a cool category because we get to see old minis versus reimagined ones and those from completely new factions. Now, Oliver Pratt takes bronze with this Grand Cathay Envoy, such a harmonious piece. The whole entry is balanced around the monochrome green scheme, only somewhat broken by the blue on the gem and the glass of the vial. I also like the round doorway in the back, creating some cool negative space for the mini to stand in. Second place goes to Magnus Nielsen with this awesome Slayer Dwarf. We see his trademark texture on almost all materials. The axe received a burnished metal look this time. What I like is how the surroundings are reflecting in the metals, like the orange beard, the blue cloth, and the greenish ground reflecting in the axe. Generally, every surface is influencing the one adjacent to it. I gotta say though, personally I'm not really a fan of the burnished metal finish on miniatures, because to me the brushstrokes not being parallel but more angled against each other, and that gives me the impression of an uneven execution, more than it gives me the "oh that's a cool effect" vibes. Maybe it's just that the effect is a little out of scale. And what I'm trying to say with that is that the lines would have to be a lot thinner if you think of it. If we upscaled this, the lines would probably be about a centimeter or two, while in reality they are a fraction of a millimeter. But again, that's just me. The texture extends into skin tones too, giving you the notion of very thick, rugged dwarf skin, and I very much like the steel armor down here, with the specular highlight and light playing on the edge, as well as the ground reflecting in that lower part. Gold went to Lucas Saba, giving us his trademark oil paint, fueled smoothness on this converted Bretonian horse, inspired by some older artwork. The wings are absolutely phenomenal. I love these patterns. They look so real. Every brushstroke is placed in the perfect place. The stone texture makes it look like it's a real block, weighing a ton, shrunken down to create the space. And of course the black water with the foam crest forming on the top of the waves. As the water crashes against the blocks, the black water just creates a sense of dread and gives us an idea about the horrors this knight might be facing ahead. The legs of the horse reminds me a bit of every swole bro meme out there, and it doesn't really get better as we look at the turntable that Games Workshop provided. But this is his typical sculpting style that is a bit more fantastic than realistic, I'd say. But again, he's such a master, especially when it comes to rendering metal and smoothness and all of the fur texture. Also, these colors look so intense. very distinct style. One additional piece that caught my eye was this Khemri Lich Priest in the process of raising a skeleton, but they're Clausen. I think what makes this so striking is the high contrast, both in the gold and the gemstone. It all goes from very dark to very bright. I also like all the individual textures on the priest and the bone color on the skeleton, and of course the greenish magic flowing through his eyes and hand, and also the skeleton's eye sockets. The Middle Earth category opens with this Prince Haleth of Rohan by Daniel Jolene, taking third place. I just love the earthen tone, really subtle highlight patterns, and the shield and the helmet placed next to a stone on the base are a nice detail. I also like the very realistic grass base, really makes this look like a scene from a movie. Second place goes to Nathan Cartwright with this Glorfindel, really smooth rendition. And first place is taken by Nicholas Ruins Mortensen. Another gold for him in the competition with the Swan Knight in his usual textured style. This was one of the pieces I mentioned that scored finalist in Essen and walked away with a gold trophy at Adepticon. One additional banger in this category is this Gimli by Demosthenes Xilas. If you look at it from the front, it's a very well painted mini in front of a backdrop made from a broken wall. But when you turn it around, all of a sudden you see the mood change. This angle shows the scene immersed in its warm light, and when you turn it to the other side, it's a more moody and cold feeling. Another piece that stood out to me was Anthony Wang's entry of Frodo facing a Nazgul on Fell Beast. The photos he posted are a bit blurry and small, but the scene is very epic, and I like how the membranes look almost as if light was shining through them. One last entry from this category I want to mention is Bruce Rose's Theoden, and what I liked about this was the crisp execution. The light on all of the metal pieces just looks so good. I also like how the grass on the base looks super realistic, and the rendition of the hair also very intriguing. Kyle Dalton wins bronze in the Blood Bowl category with this Chaos Dwarves bunch. I love the angled base, not being the regular square base really makes this stand out, and I especially like the barren surface we are presented with versus the usual grass. A lovely rich red tones, maybe a few harsher highlights here and there on the red, which is always hard to highlight up, but I also like the hue of the gold, resulting in a more blinged out vibe, and I like the contrast on the steel and the fur texture on the bull body. The fact that there's a goblin, a dwarf, and a bull centaur thing makes sure that this is a diverse team and really opens up the possibility to show that you can paint lots of different things very well. A second place goes to Nathan Cartwright with a re-entry from Essen again. This time he managed to finish the emblem on the base too. I'm kind of skipping over the ones I already talked about in last year's finalist videos. I don't mean to disrespect, but I know a lot of you already watched that video and it would just be copy-paste comments, and I really don't want to bore you by repeating myself. But congrats to Nathan, these absolutely deserve the demon. And finally, gold goes to Magnus Nielsen for this Black Orc duo. I fondly remember when this box came out. This was one of the first videos I did after joining the Games Workshop partner program, and I didn't really paint any Blood Bowl back then, but they sent me this box and I opened it, and these black orcs just looked really awesome. I instantly painted one of them in a style for beginners and made a follow-up video on how to push yourself and how to improve past the beginner approach, and those are to this day one of my most successful videos out there, so I have very fond memories about these guys. As for Magnus Entry, I like that it is a very subtle scheme, very fitting for these minis. Magnus is one of these guys that adopted a heavily textured approach. You can see lots of stippling on the pants, but also the face, and then there's some cool scratch patterns on the fists. I love the subtle definition of the black armor parts, like the very wide and diffuse highlights on the shoulders gives us the impression of a more dull armor, of course. What's cool about this is that there seems to be a universal highlight color going on all elements, which helps drawing everything together and reinforces the mood. If you look at the strap on the shoulder, for example, and then the black armor next to it, the highlight colors look very uniform. Also, the forehead of the orc looks highlighted that way. It just draws everything together and creates a nice mood. I also like how the little guy in the front is brighter than the big honky orc in the back. A cool little contrast that makes them both stand out from each other. The Blood Bowl category was a bit of a mess. There was lots of entries that got moved out of this category because it was no longer allowed to mix different factions. And so we saw Markus Klamecker's cool little scene getting moved to diorama category, for example, which still allows you to compete, but of course that was the most sad category of them all. Something a little more sad happened to Pablo Lopez Jimeno, who had his Blood Bowl entry completely removed from the cabinets because it had scenery that was just too close to Middle Earth. Crazy. And Games Workshop is very proactive about this because of the license agreement they have with New Line Cinema, who hold the rights ever since the movie trilogy. It's a bit ridiculous in my opinion, but not much we can do. One more entry that was really enjoyable, but that also got moved, this time to the Duel category, again because it had mixed factions, was Nikos Ogrin and this Goose Chaser. And not only was this a very fun entry, I think it's also very well executed, especially the skin tones. And finally, this Ripper Bolgrot just had such an awesome bright color scheme. The blue skin tones with that secondary light on the belly, the purple details on the nose, and the crystals on the back just works so well. Lots of really well rendered textures and that little yellow detail on the helmet and the shoulder. Lots of chaos on the base around him. Just a really well rounded entry. In the Necromunda category, bronze goes to Alessandro Marinone and his Grime military attaché. This is one of my favorite minis of the range. There's just so much detail and character to it. And Alessandro does it justice with that small scene he built around it. I like the skull emblem back here that's holding together the curtain in the background. The gold on the foot looks very convincing. I like that grayish black hue the gold shadows have. The red sash looks very detailed for such a small part of the mini. And my favorite is the face here. Really smooth and it supports the mood and character of the mini really well. Second place goes to Bruce Rose, giving us these two hired gun rascals in a mini diorama. Very cool base element. I also enjoy the soft chipping and weathering with some extra rust accumulating in some spots. And then in contrast to these more muted elements, we have the intensely colored clothes. Real chromatic green and blue. The faces look really characterful. And I think the paint job really elevates the sculpt. The pale face of this guy is probably my favorite element. Daniel Cholin wins another demon. Gold this time with this dealer of curiosities. I love the little scene with the graffiti on the wall, the sewer grate and the additional wares in the back. As well as the wanted poster. Really cool little detail. And speaking of it, there's also a lot of attention to detail in the model. Really lovely skin tones and well-defined face. Really makes you believe this guy is alive. I can't really place the miniature, so I'm not sure if this is a conversion. Maybe someone can help me out in the comments. I have one honorable mention for this category. I really enjoyed this Carl Jericho by David Diamondstone. I love how the base is built and also the subtle weathering and staining on it. The face is rendered with great character and the color scheme is homogeneous with some cool texturing that fits the rest of the scene very well. In epic scale, John Majota wins another demon with this Land Raider, and we can see that his trademark weathering also works well in the smaller scale. The base looks really cool in my opinion. The broken asphalt next to a more sandy terrain that's slowly invading the black surface of the street. Simple but effective, I really like it. Second place goes to Pablo Lopez Jimeno and his Manta and Tiger Shark. We already talked about this in the SN finalist video. Happy you won a trophy here. Really cool little scene with these crafts usually being massive. I'd like to see how tall the space is where they are docked. Gold goes to Ivan Borcic and this Thunderhawk gunship. On first sight, my mind was putting this into the larger scale. I guess that's proof that this is really well executed. Lots of subtle weathering, the dark streaking and the subtle bright chipping on the edges makes for an awesome combo. I also love the small jump pack marines floating around, or I guess jumping out of the hatch rather. A very cool little detail. Nice decal work too. Awesome discoloration on the exhausts. And I also like the way the cockpit is painted. On the side reflecting some landscape and the bright lines of light in the front windows. Really cool effect. Diorama this year was the strongest category in my opinion. Besides Age of Sigmar Large maybe. It's always amazing how much effort the participants pour into these entries. And one of them is Tom Carpe, who built this diorama inspired by the already iconic artwork. Lovely use of the kill team terrain. I thought we would have seen a lot more of this by now. I just really like these hatches. A subtle freehand painting in the background, really setting the scene of a war-torn planet with the toxic yellow air and the burning mega structure in the back. I like the crazy-eyed commissar and the almost surprised pose of the sororita. The whole scene takes place in a more muted light with the light that is placed after all, creating a very cool mood. Like the glow of the plasma on the sororita and the specular light on the Space Marine helmet. Silver goes to Andy Wardle and his Jade Wizard, which turned out to be a pretty extensive conversion. This is based on the Empire Jade Wizards, like the one in the Darkwater box as far as the lore goes. And this guy has a small fox-like creature with him called a Forest Spirit, and Andy added a Forest Spirit on steroids. It's based on the Drox model that has gotten a head swap with Belladama Volga's Wolf, and then most of the fur was resculpted, and Andy also added these thick roots of vines. I was asking him what models he used for the wizard conversion, and he was kind enough to share it. The base for the wizard was this Oracle of the Abyss, and a few other pieces came from these two Chaos models. The final composition is really forcing the viewing angle, placing the trees to frame the scene in the background. That actually tells you how to look at it, and that's why this scene is so powerful in my opinion. You almost can't look at it, quote-unquote, the wrong way. The wolf has a ghostly, a more ethereal quality, supported by these more jade greens and turquoise compared to the more natural greens of the druid and the rest of the vegetation. It really sets the spirit apart from the rest of the scene, even though it all pretty much is monochrome. The miniature has such a strong expression, and the green eyes staring out from under the hood makes it even more impressive. A super smooth execution, whether that's the ropes, the fur of the spirit, the trees, the moss on the trees, etc. Definitely one of my favorites of this show, because it really combines composition with kit bashing and sculpting to tell a very strong story. Gold goes to David Aroba with this giant diorama, and the picture alone definitely can't do it justice, so I'm grabbing a few shots from David's Instagram. Before we can talk about the awesome paint job, it's really crazy how each angle just reveals another small story element, like the Necromancer standing in the hallway, the king rising from his crypt when you peek through the door, skeleton warriors, probably the king's guard rising from the ground as well, the dragon claw resting on an imperial statue, and underneath an undead cat chasing rats, both alive and undead, and just tons and tons of other details. David said that this took more than 800 hours to finish, which makes sense because the whole scene had to be built, and then he probably had to plan in what order and how far to assemble everything so he could still reach every element properly while painting. And then as far as the painting goes, I don't even think David's own pictures do it justice. Very hard to talk about everything in detail because this is just so hard to photograph. I'll just show you everything I could find and let you revel in all its glory. Here's a few shots from the base building too. Lots of sculpted stones to fill the gaps between the plastic parts, then a crypt on top with additional details like the cross and the statue. And David said the biggest challenge was to mount the dragon on top of this in a credible and natural way. One very fun entry I found in this category was this orc flyer with the awesome force perspective background. There's lots of stuff going on. The explosions around it, the burning engine, the landscape in the back, and the miniature terrain with a tiny bane blade on the ground. Moving into the duel category, we have Adam Lee coming in third with this Wisik versus a demounted Griff Charger. I find it interesting that he got rid of the horn detail, makes the character look different right away in an interesting way. These are some really cool looking trees, never seen this type of model tree before. I usually have a bit of a problem with bases that have trees on them because usually they are made from natural material and somehow betray the scale. But these look fantastic. Wisik himself has been rendered in all kinds of textures, the most intriguing one probably being the ropes. Really intriguing pattern here, never seen something like it. Then of course all the awesome fur texture shifting from dark to bright hairs. Just look at the leg for example, and some really interesting copper armor with these large reflection patterns, very similar to the bell on the ground. Definitely a more distinct style. It's a bit hard to talk about the rest of the entry. I didn't find any additional angles because unfortunately I couldn't find any social media accounts by Adam. I had a similar problem with Pierre's silver winning piece. Obviously, just looking at this from one angle doesn't tell you the whole story, but luckily I found his Instagram profile and he actually gave a list of all the bits he used. He also kindly sent me pictures of a few more angles, and he also told me that the conversion took longer than the painting. A very cool retro scene, I don't know if it's supposed to be Tyrion, but the High Elf mini is at least based on his old model. And he's dueling a Dark Elf on Cold One. I'll be honest, I'm not necessarily a fan of the flat armor parts, but he said he wanted to have a flat canvas to paint all the reflections himself and have that do all the heavy lifting. I kind of like that both miniatures are painted in muted colors, like even the purple has that bluish sheen to it, making it look really cold. The gold has a desaturated cool tone as well. And I also like the textures on both the Horus and the Cold One. Gold goes to Borja and this banishment of Magnus the Red. And this is where Games Workshop's one picture setup cannot do the piece justice at all. The whole piece is centered around Logan Grimnar's axe Mordkai, the only weapon able to harm Magnus during the siege of the Fenris system. There's this piece of clear resin that is attached to the weapon. I guess it's supposed to be Magnus' essence being ripped from his physical body as the axe cuts through him. And this becomes the central light that illuminates the scene. We can see light flooding the base and the Demon Primarch's hand and arm and most of Logan. The storytelling, moods and light is clearly the focus here. And the piece has tons of conversions. Just look at Logan's crazy dynamic pose. And on Magnus we have a weapon swap as well as the different pose and the wings curving. The painting style is very expressive. Lots of colors in all transitions and a lot of complicated reflections on the steel parts with a focus on credible light placement. Lots of lines on the wings and a very cool pattern, including the colder outline on the edge of the individual feathers, helping with readability. Another piece that's probably taken hundreds of hours to complete. In the Youngbloods category, we are starting with this bronze entry by Niam and his really interesting interpretation of this Nurgle champion. I like that everything kind of has the same texture to it on first sight, gives this a really ethereal appearance, like it is phasing in and out of reality. Makes it really busy in a way, which just supports the feeling of everything being constantly vibrating. And the colors bleeding over into different elements also supports that. I also like the sculpted rock and the painted texture on it, and the way we almost get a sky-earth reflection pattern in the armor of the leg here. Silver goes to Zack and his version of the Sanguinor. Cool definition of the wings. The blue in the recesses almost makes this look like a cast shadow. I like that he tried his hand on non-metallic metal, nice saturated yellows and browns, and some nice contrast in there too. This really makes this look like light is reflecting, especially in the shoulder area here. And I also like the texture on the scrolls, as well as the liquid effect in the flask. And gold is claimed by Graydon and Estante. Also a non-metallic metal piece, cool secondary reflection patterns in the armor with the orange color and good contrast. I also really like how vivid the gems look and the small lightning effect on the axe. In the open competition, Semlens took bronze with this Imperial Fist diorama. I like the way he builds perspective with the gradually smaller getting pieces and the epic scale marines in the back, eventually fading into the painted background. Second time we have seen these small scale minis used to build some narrative. Really got to appreciate the creativity here. And then Lucas takes home a second demon with this version of Festus. The classic I have something in the Age of Sigmar large category already. Let me put this into the open category. But if you follow the Squidmar channel, you realize that this mini has actually been painted for a video. And I didn't spend a huge amount comparing the two results, but I think the only thing that he added is the foliage. Which is a little bit wild, because as far as I understand, the challenge of the video was to finish a miniature in 16 hours. So obviously Lucas knows how to paint fast and what painting fast is all about, which usually means focusing on placing the light in a credible way, and this has been achieved flawlessly. On top of that, there's also a clear understanding of what colors would harmonize well with each other, for example Festus' purple robes and the more yellowish skin tones. A lot of the details of the original mini have been cut away, probably to save time for the video, but this didn't necessarily harm the mini. It's a more stripped down version that focuses on the essentials. And this is level 10 Festus before he goes and farms experience to become level 99 Festus. Gold in the open category goes to Alfonso Giraldes, and I was so happy when I saw this entry, because it's everything that Golden Demon was to me for a long time, and especially the open category. But let's take it step by step. Because for a long time in the early 2000s, there used to be a large-scale category. From a time when the Inquisitor game system existed and was supported. This game featured 54mm scale minis, and it was one of my favorite categories. I entered a couple of times, scratch building artworks that I liked, and Alfonso doing his version of Ibram Gaunt from scratch is a bit of a nostalgia moment for me. All of the figure is scratch built in the traditional way using milliput, polymer clay and green stuff, as well as all kinds of wires and rods. And then there is the beautiful base with the resin water. The way this area was painted really looks like there's light falling through water and creating these refraction patterns. The verticality of the base is amazing too. There's multiple levels that the character is ascending. Very cool jungle atmosphere. And then of course the painting is very characterful too. The black boots with the bluish sheen and the uniform almost built a chromatic black made from warm and cold tones, and the speck of light on the chest, almost looking like there is light peeking through the treetop. The Slayer sword goes to David Aroba, and honestly, this is one of these wins where it's hard to argue otherwise. The piece just demands attention. What really made it stand out to me wasn't just the insane amount of work. Every angle tells a story. Every sub-scene feels intentional, and yet nothing feels disconnected or bloated. And that's incredibly hard to achieve in a piece this large. Granted though, given the sheer amount of area to cover with paint, there was no flashy painting experiments, but how cohesive everything feels makes this such a solid and strong entry. Like everything is executed to the same high standard, whether that's the stones in the wall, the individual figures like the Necromunda, subtle glow effects from the candles, or the skin of the dragon and the armor of the vampire. It's not just a showcase of technical ability, it's a showcase of decision making. And I think this ties into a bigger trend that we've seen for a while now. People are investing more and more time into their entries. We're talking hundreds of hours, becoming almost the norm at the very top level. And while that obviously pushes the overall quality higher and higher, it also changes what Golden Demon is. We don't see a lot of painters bringing 3, 4, or 5 top-level entries to the competition anymore like we saw in the past. Usually their eggs are all in that one basket. The one entry that is pushed to perfection in every aspect. Storytelling, world building, lore accuracy, composition, conversion, and painting. Even single minis have almost diorama level bases nowadays. Everything feels like a long-term project, and frankly I read a lot about extra hours spent painting, losing sleep over it, and not enough time to push everything to a higher level. And I guess making sacrifices is part of any high-level competition, but at least for me it's important not to burn myself out on something that I usually just do for fun. And maybe this has other consequences. On one hand, the top level we're seeing is absolutely insane and incredibly inspiring. On the other hand, it might also explain why some categories feel a bit thinner, or why we sometimes see fewer finalists. Not everyone can or wants to commit that kind of time, and that bar can feel intimidating enough to not even try, especially for, but not limited to, newer painters. But at the same time, Golden Demon has always evolved. And maybe this is just the current phase, where craftsmanship, planning and endurance are as important as brush control. So whether you are aiming for the Slayer sword or just thinking about entering for the first time, don't let that intimidate you too much. Because at the end of the day, it's still about putting a miniature in that cabinet, being part of the event and pushing yourself a little further than last time. Also, no one ever said, damn, I wish I didn't enter Golden Demon for the first time. It sucked. They all walked away invigorated and inspired to improve and learn. Let me know what you think about these trends, which was your favorite entry this year, and are you hyped to enter the competition yourself, seeing all these fantastic entries? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, keep pushing that pigment, and see you in the next one.